This podcast discusses domestic violence, criminal behavior, murder, and adult themes. While not explicit, listener discretion is advised. Ellis Maxwell seems cautious. We're sitting in a studio at KSL, the radio station where I work, talking about the Susan Powell investigation. I've just asked Ellis about the wiretap West Valley Police set up on Josh and Steve Powell's phones in 2011.
What can you tell me about that?
That's a good question.
Ellis and we've spent hours discussing the case over the past year. We've come to know a bit about one another. I'd like to think we've developed a rapport. He's been retired from the police force for 2.5 years by the time of this conversation, and is, to my ears, very candid.
Sitting here and, meeting with you and answering your questions and sharing some insight, it actually has been beneficial for me, and it's helped me kind of get through my own struggles from doing it, because it's always going to be there. It's never going to go away.
But the wiretap is where Ellis draws the line. He's not going to reveal inside information of police tactics. I come at Ellis again from a different angle, asking a more general question. What do you have to show a judge in order to get a wiretap?
To get a wiretap is very difficult, and yes, you have to exhaust every other investigative tactic. But that was the stage we were in the investigation. We had pretty much wrapped up everything that we could traditionally, and now we were kind of going in a non-traditional direction, and we had to be creative and try to get Josh to disclose and give us some information.
This concept of exhaustion, trying everything else possible before resorting to a wiretap, is an important legal hurdle. Police can't just listen to phone calls without first proving they've given traditional tactics every opportunity to work.
There's just nothing left. Basically, at the end of the day, the agency has done everything that they can do, and they still have hit a brick wall. They still don't have the evidence, the witness, the confession, all of those things. And so I think you've got to identify why that wiretap is going to be successful. And clearly, Josh and Steve and Josh's brother Michael, they all communicated frequently. And, so, yeah.
This is Cold, Episode 11, Operation Tsunami. I'm Dave Cawley. Before we get too far, I need to make something very clear. In this episode, I'm going into detail on some unconventional tactics police used during the later stages of the Powell investigation. Much of this information has never been disclosed. In our interviews, Ellis Maxwell refused to go into specifics about what I've come to learn was a wide-ranging plan conceived during the summer of 2011, codenamed Operation Tsunami. The intricacies I've pieced together come from a series of internal police planning documents that I obtained without the knowledge or approval of Ellis or any of the other law enforcement officers involved in this case. I'm going to be careful and selective in what I share, as full disclosure of the methods and tactics could run the risk of doing real harm to future investigations.
J. Brooks Jewelers, locally owned and operated, where the owner is on-site working with customers to provide years of experience and jewelry expertise. Murray and Lehigh, J. Brooks Jewelers, passionate about being part of your life celebrations.
There are so many aspects to the Susan Powell investigation, it's been hard to get them all into cold. If you want even more exclusive details regarding Susan's story, head over to Wondery.com/plus and sign up now for access to bonus content you won't find anywhere else. That's Wondery.com/plus. Again, WONDERY.com/PLUS to hear 3 bonus episodes you won't get anywhere else. Let's jump back to Sunday, December 6th of 2009. the last day anyone saw Susan Powell alive. The winter sun had just set. Darkness descended on the Salt Lake Valley. Josh Powell was making plans. Susan, his wife, had gone down for a nap after eating a meal Josh had prepared. Her neighbor, Giovanna Owings, sat in the living room of the Powell family's home, working to unravel a knotted ball of yarn. Josh wanted Giovanna gone.
And he came in and he said that he and the boys were going to go sledding. And I was really concentrating on untangling the yarn, so I didn't get his gentle hint that it was probably time for me to go home.
Josh grabbed his work-issued laptop just before 5:30 p.m. He opened Internet Explorer and went to AccuWeather.com, then KSL.com, and pulled up the forecast. It showed a huge winter storm was bearing down. He quickly glanced at some weather and traffic webcams from around Utah. He flipped over to Google and typed the words Ely, Utah, map. The top hit was a page on Ely, Nevada at citydata.com. He clicked that link, and his browser cached 3 thumbnail images showing street, aerial, and topographic map views of Ely. Next, he searched the phrase sledding Tooele, Utah.
He started putting the boys' coats on them and their shoes on them.
Minutes later, he shooed Giovanna out of the house.
So I went out, got in my car. He put the boys in the van, and while I was just doing my seatbelt up, getting situated, he and the boys drove off in the van, and then I just went home.
Giovanna didn't see Josh or Susan again that night. She's still not sure where he went with the boys or how Susan ended up out of the house.
From everybody else's accounts, I think that he came home and he got Susan and then left with her and the boys and some camping equipment. And heaven only knows where he went after that. I wish I did. It'd make my life a little bit easier, make everybody's life a whole lot easier if we could, put this to rest.
West Valley City Police took Josh's work laptop 2 days later while serving their first search warrant at the Sarah Circle house. But it took months for the cached internet files revealing those searches to come to light. They were buried among more than 5.5 terabytes of information recovered from Josh's devices. The fact he had searched for information about Ely just before leaving the house on the day Susan was last seen alive seemed significant. So let's talk about Ely. Ely came to being in the 1870s as little more than a stage stop on the old Pony Express route. A few decades later, prospectors learned the surrounding mountains were rich in copper, gold, and silver. A mining boom erupted, bringing in the railroad. So began a cycle of boom and bust that played out over the next century. Today, Ely serves as the intersection of 3 U.S. highways, 6, 50, and 93. It sits roughly midway between Las Vegas and West Wendover, not too far from the Utah-Nevada state line, and just a ways north and west of Great Basin National Park. It's kind of in the middle of nowhere, but barely within range of Josh Powell's possible desert travels during the span of time that Susan disappeared. Records show West Valley's intelligence analysts uncovered the first clues about Ely relatively early, in May of 2010. But it wasn't until July of 2011, a year and a half after Susan's disappearance, that they pieced together the full picture. They came to understand that Josh had done more than just look at maps, traffic cameras, and weather forecasts for Ely in the days leading up to Susan's disappearance. He had pulled up listings for the Motel 6 and Ramada Inn there.
We could not ignore it. It came directly off of Josh's computers.
But Ellis didn't want to run out and start a search around Ely right away. At that point, the bulk of the investigation was focused on Washington State.
Ironically, the time that we discovered that information kind of fell within line of the operations that we were doing in Washington. So it didn't make sense to rush out there and do it, within that week or two when we discovered that information on Ely. it made more sense to kind of coordinate that with our operations in Washington.
That's as close as Ellis ever came to telling me about Tsunami. Here's what I've learned about those operations from the documents. Police had reached a dead end in the investigation. Nothing they'd tried to get Josh to slip up or speak out had worked. So they started brainstorming how to get him talking privately while they listened in on his conversations. One prong of that plan included going public with a search around Ely.
Yes, we wanted Josh to see this on the news, see what he had to say about it and see if it would give us, some direction.
Of course, Josh wasn't going to talk to police about it. He would probably only share with his family. In order for that plan to work, police needed a wiretap so they could monitor Josh's phone calls. Utah District Court Judge Judith Atherton approved the wiretap request on August 9th. Everything associated with the wiretap warrant was sealed at that time. It remains sealed to this day. Atherton, who has since retired, did not respond to a request for an interview for this podcast. Police records show detectives started listening to Josh and Steve's phone calls on August 16th. 2 days later, they announced plans for a search of abandoned mines around Ely, Nevada. This was the launch of Tsunami. Going public with the mine search was a conspicuous shift in strategy. Remember, all of the other mine searches up to that point had happened behind a veil of secrecy. Was the hope that maybe that media coverage would cause him to say something that you guys might be able to pick up through other channels?
Bingo.
Okay. In law enforcement lingo, this tactic is referred to as tickling the wire.
In this West Valley neighborhood, friends close to Susan Powell are now hopeful that they'll hear some answers.
I'm trying not to think about it.
Debbie Caldwell runs the daycare where the Powell kids spent much of their time. Like many others, she's just hearing that West Valley police are following up on what could be a major lead in the case in Ely, Nevada.
I really would like to know where she is, what happened to her. And I want her boys to grow up and know where their mom is and what happened to her. They deserve that.
Debbie continues to keep the search for Susan alive.
West Valley's press release announcing the Ely search described it as a follow-up on a possible lead in the case. As I've already explained, that was true. But to sweeten the pot, police also said the media would have a chance to shoot photos and video under certain conditions.
For Jennifer Graves, Josh Powell's sister, the past year and a half have been frustrating. She says she has no idea what news will come tomorrow.
Yeah, it must be something, something's going on. So I'm as eager as anybody to figure out what it is.
Newsroom managers in Salt Lake City were skeptical. They weren't quite sure just how much credence to give this invitation, especially because West Valley refused to give out any more details ahead of time, even off the record. The phrasing of the press release prompted speculation, though, that police might have learned the location of Susan's body. Which, of course, they hadn't. But the only way for the news crews to find out was to make the trip.
At this point, we just want answers, and we just want to know what happened.
Those answers could be on the way. With word that West Valley police now have a credible lead in the case, some of Susan's friends are now eager to hear what they have to say.
An operational planning document showed police were more than a little worried the media wouldn't take the bait. But come on, the possibility of a break in the Powell story was way too big to ignore. No one wanted to sit out that opportunity.
We are here to follow up on investigative information that has led us to this area in direct relationship to the Susan Powell missing person investigation.
What is that? What are you here for?
Detectives have made a preemptive drive out here to see what it was that we may be looking at. The information that detectives have indicated has led them to this area, and it's something that they felt strongly enough that we needed to follow up on and to further investigate. That is the reason why we are here today.
I was expecting more. I was definitely expecting more. I was just sitting there crying while I was watching it.
The team in Nevada took the reporters around to look at some dusty holes in the ground.
This is one of the mine shafts that crews are searching today, and they say this one has clearly been breached. You can tell by the fencing that has been bent and moved out of the way. Now, this just may look like a harmless tunnel. It looks very stable, but crews say it is very unstable. There are unseen dangers, and they can go through and fall down hundreds of feet.
At the same time, another West Valley team was in Washington, conducting eyes-on surveillance of Josh and Steve. A third team back in Utah manned the wire room from 6 a.m. to midnight. They waited for Josh to see the news coverage, to pick up his phone, and to call his dad.
If that was the place that he visited and maybe just boasted of Susan, clearly he's going to mention that. He would get nervous. His mannerisms would change. There's a lot of things there that would have been beneficial.
The first day of the search focused on mine openings and gravel pits a few miles west of town, below a place called Squaw Peak. The news crews watched as the West Valley cops, Bureau of Land Management staff, and White Pine County Sheriff's deputies used spotlights to peer into the holes. It all looked very familiar and reasonable to the two abandoned mine experts from the Utah Department of Natural Resources who'd basically taught West Valley Police how to do this work.
I know they looked down that way. We weren't involved in that because that's Nevada, but that still was right on the periphery of where it's possible to look. So that's why we concentrated in these areas, and also high concentrations of open mines in those areas.
Remember, Louis Ammett and Tony Gallegos had spent weeks in early 2010 practically living in the West Desert with detectives. But Louis said over time, he and Tony had stepped away from helping with the mine searches in person. They didn't have any inside information about this new search.
You kind of had to put some distance between, because you still couldn't talk about it. And then you couldn't just call up the detectives and say, hey, what's happening? Because, they're still involved in the investigation. And at that point, they wouldn't be able to tell you anything anyway. But it was always in the back of your mind.
Both men had been left with a sense of incompletion. A job undone.
I followed some of the headlines and things after, but a little bit of distance, but I was still curious and still interested in some sort of resolution. So with the headlines about the search, or when Josh Powell moved away and all those things, I was still sort of following that.
Tony, though, worried what all that publicity might lead to.
Yeah, I remember the headlines about the Nevada searches and so on, and then I remember the public search groups, and you sort of like, well, that's a great thing, but we went out there with the detectives and we checked out all the sites we could access based on their criteria. Sort of like you wanted to say, well, you don't need to look there anymore. Look somewhere else where we weren't able to spend time. But then again, you really even didn't want to encourage people to go into these mine openings that were really not safe. And you didn't want someone being hurt while they're out searching for someone. And, it could be families or kids or whoever. So it was good that they were wanting to help, but it really didn't want to encourage people to go poking around the mine openings.
It is very dangerous.
Not a safe thing.
West Valley Police didn't find anything in Ely that first day. Reporters turned on the department's spokesman, Sergeant Mike Powell, no relation, when he delivered the news.
We expected an announcement, a break in the case of missing Utah mom Susan Powell. West Valley City Police held a press conference hundreds of miles from Salt Lake in Ely, Nevada, but no announcement came.
The information is very limited that I'm able to disseminate to the public, as you are very well aware.
Sergeant Mike Powell says new information led them to Ely, but he wouldn't give any details. After dodging questions about specifics, Sergeant Powell invited the media to a show and tell of the rugged hills above the sleepy Nevada town. But what had connected these mine shafts with Susan Powell? Frustrated reporters kept the questions coming, and Sergeant Powell eventually issued a statement saying a prior search warrant had led them to Ely, but that's about as much as he would say. He says the biggest purpose of inviting the media to Ely was to shine the public spotlight back on the case.
This has also brought to life the fact that there has been some downtime, significant downtime in the media coverage on this case. And obviously at this point that has changed. And really one of our biggest and best assets is the public as a whole.
It will bring a flood of new leads, so that, I guess, I can be grateful for that.
Ellis told me he gets why the media and the public were so irritated at that point.
I know the media really thought that it was a ruse, and I think they were upset, but it was a legit lead that in information we discovered that was directly from Josh's computer, and it was something that we had to follow up on.
Of course, West Valley Police couldn't and didn't say a word about the wiretap. They obviously couldn't say there was a larger plan in motion. The next day, the searchers headed south about 20 miles to the historic Ward mining district. They checked some of the extensive workings in that area and again came up empty.
Jen and Keith, we have a pair of mysteries tonight. One is what exactly happened to Susan Powell. The other is what exactly was the purpose behind the high-profile search in Ely, Nevada. The city's mayor says he's confident in police investigators and that the case will eventually be solved.
They held another news conference.
Looks like we're going to be done and finished with what our goals were from the beginning.
But is there any new leads that were generated from this?
At this point, I don't have the answer to that.
Josh did see the news coverage, and he seemed unimpressed. Here's what he told KSL that day.
It just didn't seem like they said anything. Honestly, that's kind of what went through my mind. I actually thought that they were going to be looking in hotels, apartments, things like that. That's what I was hoping they'd be looking for people, frankly, for Susan.
That was an interesting thing for Josh to say, given police knew he had looked at motel listings in Ely. Publicly, Josh didn't seem the least bit nervous. On the wiretap, police intercepted a call in which Josh said law enforcement was wasting its time in Ely. Quote, "That's for damn sure."
Clearly we did the search and we didn't discover anything, and Josh's behavior in his attitude and mannerisms in his discussions didn't support that he was concerned at all.
As West Valley Police were getting their wiretap that August, Josh was also in court, asking for a protective order against his in-laws. Bad blood between Josh and the Coxes had kept growing ever more sour, like spoilt milk left out in the sun. Though they lived just 4 miles apart, Josh had refused to allow Susan's parents to ever see their grandsons.
He had decided that because we were treating him and his family so bad that we were not allowed to see the boys anymore. Okay, well, in a public place, they can certainly see Grandma and Grandpa.
One day, Chuck and Judy Cox were leaving Lowe's after buying some stuff for their yard when someone stopped them in the parking lot and told them Josh, Charlie, and Braden were at that very moment inside the store. So Chuck and Judy turned around and went back into Lowe's.
We saw them over there, and the kids saw us and come running towards Grandma and Grandpa, and it was like, oh wow, and and he was terrible. We were picking on him and everything because we were in his store, his space.
Josh wasn't going to stand for this. Chuck, for his part, tried to remain calm.
The police oftentimes, and others, had said, don't you just want to grab him by the shirt and just shake him and say, tell me where my daughter is? I said, oh yeah, I'd love to do that. But then he would have a case of assault against me, and and he's not going to say anything anyway, so why give him that satisfaction?
In his court filing, Josh accused the Coxes of stalking both he and the boys. Here's how he described their run-in at Lowe's.
Cox asked, "Can't we hug our grandchildren now?" And I responded, "No, you may not. Goodbye." Chuck Cox mouthed the words, "You're dead," and they refused to leave us alone for several minutes.
The encounter, as Josh recalled it, then turned even more sinister.
Cox had cornered me and my children between a stack of wood where we were building children's toys in a rack. I feared he would attack and try to kill me because he believes I am responsible for my wife's disappearance.
Now, no matter how much Chuck disliked Josh, he was not about to murder him in front of the boys and everyone else in the middle of a busy hardware store. Josh went on to call the Coxes legal strangers to Charlie and Braden and said their behavior caused bullies to pick on the boys. He also said he expected Chuck to escalate his campaign of hatred and violence until Susan returned. The story, no matter how puffed up with hyperbole, was enough for a judge to grant Josh a temporary restraining order.
You can write anything you want down for a judge, and it's good for about 7 to 10 days or something. Then you have a hearing.
But this was a game two could play. Chuck knew Josh and Steve still had his daughter's childhood journals. Secretly, police encouraged him to seek his own restraining order against the Powells to keep them from publishing those volumes, as Steve had suggested he might do on national television a month earlier. West Valley Police figured the threat of an injunction would get Josh and Steve talking. It was just another way of tickling the wire. So on Saturday, August 20th of 2011, the same day police were peering into mines outside of Ely, Nevada, Chuck held a honk and wave event for Susan.
I was assisted in the best place to put that honk and wave. And I didn't understand exactly why. That I was helped to discover where that was by the police. They gave me a kind of a getting warmer, getting colder type approach to where I should maybe set up.
Internal police documents revealed this was yet another piece of Tsunami called Remember Me. Chuck set up with pictures of Susan and purple balloons near the intersection of 176th Street East and Meridian in South Hill, just outside a Fred Meyer grocery store around the corner from the Powell family home. He hadn't been there for long before Steve happened to drive by. Police, through their prior surveillance work, had figured out where and when Josh and Steve liked to shop.
Then to see Steve pull up to the drive-thru, and I went, I get it. And then he came over here. I said, so I'm the bait. That's fine with me, you know. I'm willing to help them. They could have just told me what they wanted to do. I'd have done it, but, you know.
TV news cameras rolled as Steve confronted Chuck. It turned into a shouting match, with Steve accusing Chuck of violating the temporary restraining order. Chuck played his role to perfection.
I knew what kind of words I needed out of Steve. I needed him to say that he had the journals, say that they were important. I needed to give the police a reason to give a judge that they needed to get those journals back.
Chuck warned Steve he'd better not try to publish Susan's journals.
That's when he made this charge of I had abused Susan as a child, and he had proof in the journals. I said, you shouldn't have the journals, number one. I haven't read them, and I don't think you should have read them, and you certainly have no right to publish them, because I'd already been down that road. So I challenged him. He said, well, I can prove it. I said, well, if you publish it, then we will take legal action.
Josh showed up at the honk and wave soon afterward. Through tears, he told reporters Chuck was trying to sow discord. One Utah TV station, Fox 13, stood alongside the Seattle reporters as they interviewed Josh that day. I've learned from never-before-revealed police planning documents that detectives had reached an agreement with Fox 13, making the station part of the Tsunami plan. West Valley fed inside information to the station, hoping a reporter would have a chance to confront Josh or Steve with it. In exchange, Fox 13 agreed to post any videos with Josh or Steve online in their raw, unedited form. That would allow police to obtain the footage and add it to their evidence. Fox 13 made good on that promise, posting a story with the video to its website after the honk and wave. That story and those videos are no longer online. When asked to comment on the station's apparent collaboration with police, Tim Ermish, president and general manager of KSTU Fox 13, said, in August of 2011, Fox 13 News sent a reporter to Washington State to interview Josh Powell and also cover a honk and wave organized by Chuck Cox. We made the editorial decision to share the unedited video of both newsworthy events with our audience online. The honk and wave generated a lot of phone activity that was captured on the wiretap. In later reports, police wrote that Josh's demeanor on the phone was aggressive, a 180-degree shift from the tearful way he presented himself to the cameras. He even called a media consultant and asked how to appear more sympathetic when talking about Susan. In one call with his brother Michael, Josh explained he had never shared with anyone his activities on the night of Susan's disappearance. 3 days later, Josh's brother Michael filed a declaration in support of Josh's request for a protective order. Mike called Chuck hateful and deplorable. He, like his brother, accused the Coxes of spreading lies through the media and tearing open his family's old wounds. A Pierce County Superior Court judge held a hearing on Josh's request on August 23rd. True to form, Josh showed up late.
Most of the time, a judge would just say, okay, respondent's not here, it's dismissed, move on. But they waited for him.
Josh and Chuck both stood before the judge. For his part, Josh repeated the story about Chuck supposedly mouthing the words, "You're dead," during the encounter at Lowe's.
He knew that we would be there, and he has been stalking us to come into the places where we would be to try to inject himself into our lives, which has not gone well.
Chuck's attorney, Steve Downing, called that nonsense.
Under no circumstances has Mr. Cox ever threatened Joshua Powell.
The hearing did not go all that well for either side.
Richard Pyatt has a report on the extraordinary tension between the two families.
That's right. This happening just within the last hour, Bruce and Deanie. The Washington judge hearing the case didn't really feel that Powell's request rose to the level of a full-on domestic violence restraining order, but she did grant anti-harassment orders to Powell based on Powell's claims that Susan's father has been threatening him. Cox says that he contacted Powell, in fact, because he just wants to see the grandchildren.
But the anti-harassment order went both ways. Josh was also prohibited from contacting the Coxes or coming within 500 feet of them. Chuck felt flabbergasted.
Really? You're giving him something? And I'm thinking, really, it doesn't really matter. I'm not going to his house anyway. But it's on the basis of it, it's unfair to grant something to somebody who didn't know what to ask for. He showed contempt for the court by showing up late. He couldn't even be bothered to be there on time for it. And he had no basis for anything, but they were just going to grant this anyway. And it's just ridiculous that the judge did that. I could not believe they did that. But on the other hand, I went, I don't have any intention of bothering him.
Josh might have considered the anti-harassment order a win. Little did he know, his luck was about to take a huge turn for the worse.
Cold listeners, take coloring your hair at home to the next level with Madison Reed. You don't have to choose between outdated, chemically heavy, hair-frying box color or the time and expense of a salon. Crafted in Italy by master colorists, Madison Reed delivers professional hair color you can do at home with a step-by-step guide that makes you an expert, and it's less than $25. Those master colorists blend nuances of light, dark, cool, and warm to create over 45 gorgeous multi-tonal shades. Women love the results. This is gray-covering, game-changing color you can do at home and look as if you just came from the salon. It's ammonia-free, ingredients you can feel good about. There's even a tool on the site to help you match the exact right shade for you. Visit madison-reed.com. That's madison-reed.com. And now, Cold listeners get 10% off plus free shipping on your first color kit. Use code COLD. That's code COLD.
The very next morning, on August 24th of 2011, a judge in Washington signed a warrant authorizing a search of Steve Powell's home. They executed that warrant the next day. More than 20 members of the West Valley Police Department and Pierce County Sheriff's Office took part.
Thank God we had that many, because that house and then the things that we found was just, I hate to say it, but crazy.
That's Pierce County Detective Sergeant Gary Sanders. He was the top police liaison for the Powell case in Washington. Gary had written the warrant based off of information West Valley City's lead detective, Ellis Maxwell, had provided. The two of them led the charge.
It was nuts.
They pounded on the front door of Steve's house shortly after noon. Josh answered, only to have a flood of armed cops rush into the house shouting, "Police, search warrant!" Ellis and Gary flashed copies of the warrant while ordering Josh, John, and Alina outside. Alina at first refused to budge, but she didn't have much choice in the end.
Hot day, I remember, because the house didn't have AC, and it was a huge house. Little quadrant homes, I don't know if you know them, they're big, 3,000 square foot home, lots of rooms, but you have all those people living there, and then lots of clutter.
A deputy found Charlie and Braden in the home and brought them outside as well.
The boys, were open to seeing us, and I think they were happy when they saw outside people. They were excited for it.
Steve was not at home. His work schedule that day included a meeting far out of town. What a convenient coincidence.
Steve, he was not there.
Okay, hang on. I got to interrupt you there. I think I came across it somewhere in Steve's writings that he thought you guys came up with a phony job for him to call him away from the house that day.
Maybe not. But he wasn't there. He was a couple hours away on business.
Would I be incorrect if I characterized it as he was called away on a job that turned out not to be valid?
I don't know if it was valid or not. I'm not sure how. I wasn't there for that business meeting. Okay. But he wasn't there, so that was good.
All right, fair enough. I have to ask the question.
Again, Ellis wouldn't talk to me about this part of the plan. But I've learned from never-before-revealed police planning documents that detectives had arranged a business opportunity for Steve and invited him, through an intermediary, to discuss it over lunch at the Red Lobster in Kennewick, Washington. That's in the Tri-Cities area, about a 4-hour drive away from South Hill. Obviously, Josh was going to call his dad and alert him to what was happening at the house. Detectives back in Salt Lake City would catch those conversations on the wiretap.
And I'm pretty sure he was in communication with his father quite a bit.
Reporters were not far behind the police. Photographers set up their tripods around a perimeter of yellow police tape that fluttered under the summer sun.
We realize that everybody wants to have answers, and in due time those answers will be brought forward.
West Valley Police set up its crime scene trailer outside Josh Powell's Washington home. Authorities use it to conduct interviews and process any evidence. About a dozen detectives join members of the Pierce County Sheriff's Department in the search for clues.
We've got reason to believe, we've got probable cause to believe that there are some items of evidentiary value inside the home of the Powells.
Merritt, who's in Washington, wouldn't say what that evidence is, but he says whatever they find will help further the investigation.
As far as what we're doing today, this is just a step that has taken us a while to get to. Where we finally reached the step.
Word spread quickly, both in Washington and Utah. It was not long before Susan's dad, Chuck, heard about it.
But it was like, okay, this is great. Finally something moving on in a direction to where it should be.
The warrant gave police wide latitude. The primary target was Susan's journals, but it also listed computers and digital media that might hold scanned copies or anything containing possible passwords that might be used to get past Josh's encryption. Add to that any photos, videos, or trace evidence, and you have grounds for a very exhaustive search. Josh didn't want to wait around. Problem was, the warrant also applied to his minivan. He wasn't going anywhere until the detectives searched it. The team did a first sweep of the house, finding computers in almost every room. Josh's bedroom held a laptop that was powered on and logged in. Alina's bedroom contained 4 computers and a wireless router. One of the searchers disconnected the router, ensuring that no one could remotely log in to any of the machines over the Wi-Fi. Josh had other computers. Out in the yard, he told police he needed them for his job. He didn't want to see them sucked into the same black hole that had swallowed all of his computers from the Sarah Circle house in Utah. The detectives told him they could speed up the process of releasing the computers back to him if he'd provide them with all of his passwords. Josh said he couldn't remember his passwords. They were too long and too complex. Ellis had heard this story before. He put a keyboard in front of Josh and told him to let muscle memory take over. Josh tapped out a long string of characters, which the detectives recorded. Josh also handed over a USB key needed to get around encryption on one of his computers.
In his minimal conversations with us, we were able to recover a pretty lengthy password from him as we gave him a keyboard to type it out, but it didn't assist us in getting into any of his hard drives.
On the wiretap, police later overheard Josh telling his brother Michael that he had lied to police about not being able to remember his passwords, both then and back in 2010. Of course, Josh said. He knew his passwords.
We were hoping to get some more information from Josh, but he wouldn't talk to us.
A West Valley police lieutenant took Alina aside. She, like her brother, was angry that police planned to take her computers. In a later report, the lieutenant said Alina insisted Josh was innocent. She said she'd only change her mind on that if shown clear proof to the contrary. She asked about the search of mines around Ely the prior weekend, saying she believed it had been a ruse. The search of Josh's van was over and done with relatively quickly. Once Josh had his keys back, he loaded Charlie and Braden into their car seats. He told Alina she ought to leave, but she ignored his advice and stayed at the house with her brother, John.
So they stay there for 10 hours in the backyard because they couldn't be in the house because we didn't want them tampering us evidence. But, we tried to respect that they wanted to stay there, so we provided them shade and water and stuff like that. But they stood there the whole time, and she was on the phone, Alina, a lot that day while she was in the backyard. And I'm sure she was relaying to both Stephen and Josh what was going on.
News helicopters circled over South Hill. Chuck Cox, who didn't live all that far away, wasn't close enough by to see them in person.
I was in a makeup chair.
Were you now? That's an interesting place to be.
Yeah, I was in a makeup chair in a studio down in Seattle, getting ready to go on to talk about Ely. So I was waiting for that interview, and hey, you got to see this, and we got the live feed from the helicopter circling the place with the police, and we got, oh great. I figured finally West Valley City's arresting the idiot. And they're going to seize everything and all.
But Chuck was disappointed as the live video feed showed Josh's minivan weaving around all of the police cars and TV live trucks parked on his street. It went out to Gem Heights Drive and left the neighborhood. Detectives went through the house room by room. They carried individually numbered plastic tags, like the ones you sometimes get at a restaurant, so the server knows where to bring your order. They placed a tag next to any piece of potential evidence, then photographed it.
To be thorough and be efficient, we're documenting, photographing things in place, marking them, and then they were basically all transferred over to West Valley right there. They had a 19-foot cargo trailer that they brought up with them, and we just constantly carrying stuff out, boxing it up, taking it and putting it in there for them to take back to West Valley.
Just getting around inside the Powell house was a pretty big challenge. Bookshelves lined nearly every wall. Steve had quite the library, stuffed with volumes about love, religion, and psychology. The bedrooms were all jam-packed with junk. Boxes were piled in the hallways.
A hoarder is your biggest nightmare on a search warrant, just because you have to go through every item. You want to make sure that there's no evidence tucked away. People, you don't keep your child porn right out on the dining room table, or you don't keep your homicide weapon, there's going to be tucked away, so you're going to have to look through everything. So that's why we were there so long. With that many people, we were still there that long.
Josh's bedroom was probably the neatest. It was upstairs. On the desk, next to his computer, sat an envelope of 4x6 photo prints. The pictures were of an old mine, a place called Blind Miner of the Wasatch in Big Cottonwood Canyon, south and east of Salt Lake City. A bunch of papers on the desk held notes about Susan's journals and plans for the susanpowell.org website. A to-do list for the site included, throw out more theories. Police found Charlie's handwriting scribbled on another sheet of paper, dated July 21st of 2011. He'd written, One time, some girl locked me in a closet with the light off, and I hate Jenny and Kirk. Susan's mom and dad tortured her. One thing I know is her dad hit her on the back. Shelves lined one of the walls in Josh's room. They were full of little woodworking projects, the fruits of Charlie and Braden's labors at the Saturday morning hardware store workshops Josh loved to visit. Next to those shelves sat a small desk and the monitor for a security camera system. It was switched on. Live video feeds showed the driveway, the front porch, the yard, and the street. Josh, it appeared, had grown rather paranoid.
I think he was getting worried.
Detectives cracked the lid on a banker's box that sat in front of the bookcase. Bingo. There were Susan's childhood journals.
It played out really well. We were able to get in and collect a lot of potential evidence. We were able to recover Susan's journals that they would not provide us.
Downstairs in the garage, detectives came across a locked safe. Alina told them it belonged to Josh, and she didn't know the combination. Ellis told her to call Josh and get it. Otherwise, they'd have to take the whole thing back to Utah and tear it open. Alina dialed Josh and explained the situation. He coughed up the combo. The door to the safe swung open, revealing 4 CDs. Labels scribbled on the discs with a marker showed 3 held archives of Josh's old files. His journals, his finances, his schoolwork, and more. The 4th disc appeared to hold encryption keys. Charlie and Braden shared a bedroom, if you could call it that. It held just a single small bed.
Not a normal kid's bedroom, or 2 boys' bedrooms. You would think toys, Tonka trucks, tons of Legos and stuff like that. No.
Now, it would have made sense for the hardware store woodworking projects the boys had built to be in their room, not in Josh's room. Instead, the walls of the boys' bedroom were, like most of the rest, lined with shelves of Steve's books. John's bedroom was even more cluttered than the rest of the house.
Yeah, John's was interesting in itself. It had a noose on a hangman's noose. Had a giant paper pterodactyl that was hanging his drawings of swords through women's vaginas and just weird depictions and stuff, and then bags of hair and toenail clippings that just it was a house of horrors when we went through there. Just his room, and then when we got into Steve's room.
Detectives went into the master bedroom. Steve's lair. They stripped the sheets off of the bed. They opened all of his dresser drawers. They found a set of white 3-ring binders full of sheet music, the complete works of Stephen Chantry.
Can you feel my love and tender care, strong enough to reach you anywhere?
They went into the walk-in closet and found a beige 2-drawer filing cabinet. It was locked, though they already had an idea of what it held, thanks to that earlier search of the house Steve had consented to in May of 2010. The lieutenant brought in a power drill and went to work on the lock. Let me warn you here. What police found inside the filing cabinet was disturbing.
Yeah, what do you say when at first you open it up and you're like, oh, that's kind of, you're thinking some people have, enjoy sex toys or, other things, pornography and stuff like that. But this was, and like I said, with 20 to 25 detectives there, and we all went, wow. We were like, that's crazy.
The top drawer held Steve's trophies of Susan. A black bra, a red blouse, and a plastic container full of temple garments. Members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints wear those garments under their regular clothing as a reminder of promises made to their Heavenly Father within the church's temples. They view the garments as sacred. Steve had stolen Susan's garments from out of her dirty laundry nearly 10 years earlier and kept them all that time. The concept that doing so had been an act of heresy only served to enhance his thrill. There were voyeur photos of Susan, as well as shots from Josh and Susan's wedding. Steve had used scissors or a razor to cut Josh's face out of those pictures. His son, it seemed, was not welcome in his fantasies. Then there were the plastic baggies.
The fetish beyond all fetishes and stuff, when you've got bags of tampons that have been dated and stuff from Susan, bags of her underwear, cotton balls from when she takes, just taking fingernail polish off, clippings.
In the bottom drawer, police found commercially produced pornography on DVD and some home recording VHS tapes. The lieutenant used a tape deck connected to a TV in Steve's bedroom to quickly scan the tapes. He discovered they were voyeur videos of Susan and other women. In other words, evidence. Detectives found more VHS and Hi-8 video cassettes scattered around Steve's room. Some were labeled with Susan's name. They also located his Hi-8 camcorder, with a tape loaded and ready to use.
We're looking through, seeing these 8mm tapes, looking at DVD drives, CDs and stuff, and you're like, okay, if that's in there in plain view, we know what kind of fetishes he has now. What's on these videos?
They collected all those tapes to be reviewed in full at a later date. Perhaps most embarrassing of all for Steve, though, they found his journals. 15 Mead brand spiral-bound notebooks, each holding 150 college-ruled pages, more than 2,200 pages in all. They contained 10 years of his obsessive writings about Susan.
I think you can categorize it as filthy fantasies of Stephen Powell's.
The investigators cleared the house around midnight. As they were leaving, they learned Josh and Steve might be headed towards SeaTac Airport to catch a plane out of town. They raced north in the hopes of catching them, but were unable to spot Josh or Steve's minivans. As it later turned out, neither Josh nor Steve ran that night, though both probably wished later that they had. Tsunami had other pieces as well, some of which were never executed due to time, cost, or opportunity. The whole operation caused a fundamental shift in the state of play. In sealed court documents, police later wrote detectives caught Josh lying to his family about where he had gone in the rental car. As for Steve, he made a call during the raid at his house, in which he described being hesitant to bring his laptop into his minivan during the drive back. The van was also listed on the warrant, and anything inside of it was subject to seizure. Steve also expressed embarrassment over police finding his tapes, journals, and all the rest. Steve's humiliation had only just begun. A couple of weeks before the raid, on August 8th, Josh had walked into the Bank of America branch about 5 miles north of his dad's house. He held an object in one hand. This was familiar territory for Josh. The bank sat at the southwestern corner of 120th Street East and Meridian. That's just down the road from the South Hill Mall and across the street from the Melcorum YMCA, where he'd enrolled his sons in summer programs. Josh knew right where to go. He signed in, then carried the object into the vault that held the safe deposit boxes. His box, number 757, was one of the smaller ones on the wall. It had a light brown face and was just big enough to hold what he carried. Pulling out his keys, Josh opened the box, placed the item into it, then put the box back and relocked it. He exited the vault and walked out of the bank, never realizing he was being watched. It wasn't the police who were keeping an eye on Josh, not that time. It was a member of the public. Now, Josh's face didn't really stick out in a crowd, but he had started to open up through the summer of 2011, and had even done some media appearances. When his dad did the Today Show, Josh even provided an interview of his own. He sat down with a Seattle TV station a little while later and described the loneliness he'd felt since Susan disappeared. All this is to say, the person who spotted Josh at the bank recognized him, but didn't think anything of it at the time. However, after the search warrant raid hit the news, that person called police in Seattle with a tip. They needed to get Josh's safe deposit box. Pierce County Sheriff's Detective Gary Sanders showed up at the bank a couple of weeks later, on September 12th. He brought with him a search warrant and a power drill. The log for Box 757 showed it had first been rented a year earlier in August of 2010. Josh had stopped by a total of 14 times, sometimes coming every other week, other times going a month or two before returning. After drilling out the lock, Sanders removed the contents of the box, a single 3.5-inch hard drive. That's the size commonly used in desktop computers. It was bare, not in any sort of external case. The drive was Seagate brand, with a capacity of 1.5 terabytes. A label stuck to the top of the drive held Josh's name. Next to it was a blue sticky note, marked with 7 handwritten dates. The earliest went back to April of 2011. The most recent was August 8th, the same day the witness had seen Josh enter the bank with the drive. This was Josh's off-site backup. Sanders sealed the drive in a plastic bag, put it in a box, and shipped it FedEx overnight to West Valley City. West Valley detectives took the drive to the Intermountain West RCFL, or Regional Computer Forensics Laboratory, to join the rest of the growing pile of digital evidence seized during the search for Susan. On the next episode of Cold.
Josh wouldn't come out. And, if something like that's going on, you got police outside, your dad's getting arrested, people are taking your kids and stuff like that, you'd think he'd come out.
If you haven't already, please subscribe to Cold. Toss us a rating or a review. You can find Cold on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at The Cold Podcast. For video clips, pictures from the case, and more, hit up thecoldpodcast.com. Also, if Susan's story sounds familiar in your own life, in other words, if you or someone you know is experiencing domestic abuse in any form, please get immediate help. In the U.S., support is a phone call away at the National Domestic Violence Hotline at 1-800-799-7233 or online at www.thehotline.org. A quick thank you to the team. Kristen Sorensen, Eric Openshaw, Ken Fall, Danielle Prager, Kira Faramond, Becky Bruce, Josh Tilton, Adam Mason, Jillian Friedman, and especially Cheryl Worsley. The music for Cold was composed by Michael Bonmiller, except for the guitar stuff. That was me. Cold is a KSL podcast. Thank you for listening.